Hello, welcome back to Dinner for Her, a podcast about historical women with flavor. I am your host, Mandy Walker. Each episode, my guest and I will have a nice chat about a woman they find inspiring, then we're going to have a meal together themed around that woman's life. It could be her favorite dish, or one that played an important role in her life, or even just something central to her work or culture. This week, I am sitting down with another of my longtime friends, Terri. I won't say oldest because we are both in our prime, but we did meet in high school and are both hovering around 50, so do with that what you will. Terri, I am so glad to be here with you. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and why you chose Zora Neale Hurston as your guest of honor?
Sure. Well, my name is Terri Smith, and Mandy and I met at McGavick High School. A fortuitous event for me. So excited to be here. I grew up in the South. I'm a Southern girl. I was born in Tupelo, Mississippi.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, born in Tupelo, Mississippi. Moved to Memphis with my family, and then moved to Nashville in 1983. So love being in the South. I've lived other places, but the South always calls me home.
Yeah.
And so I call it home.
Zora's definitely a southern lady. You were telling me earlier, though, that Alice Walker is maybe your entry into Zora Neale Hurston.
I think so. I mean, like so many things that I used to know, I can't remember anymore exactly how I came across Their Eyes Were Watching God, which was my introduction to Zora Neale Hurston. But I suspect that it was Alice Walker because I saw that movie, The Color Purple, based on her book, her wonderful, wonderful book, when I was, 10 or 11. It was out in the theater, and I went with my two sisters, Gwen and Melissa. Shout out to them. They have shaped my literary interest.
Hey, Gwen and Melissa, come on the podcast.
And it just made a huge impact on me. I was absolutely entranced and transported, and it stuck with me. And I love that movie to this day. As I was telling you, Mandy, I still cry very reliably in several spots in that movie.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love the soundtrack. The soundtrack has been a huge favorite of mine. Tata Vega. Oh man, don't get me started. Mm-hmm. But I do think that is likely how I came to Zora Neale Hurston, because Alice Walker was such a champion of hers, and so that's my best guess on how I got there. But Their Eyes Were Watching God is always at the top of my recommendation list for people, especially women. And I have just always felt that she needed more face time in the public. She's just not someone that people know about. And so that's why I wanted to talk about her.
Yeah, I thought that I knew a lot about her before the last couple of weeks, and I have been eating, sleeping, breathing Zora over the last couple of weeks, and we do owe a lot of what we know about her to Alice Walker, and we'll get more into that here later on. I actually didn't know about their connection, but I loved both of them for different reasons, and once I knew about the connection, it was so obvious, the influence that she had on Alice Walker's writing and her career was completely obvious once I knew about it. But we'll get into that here in a little bit. I'm gonna give a little bit of a quick biography on Zora. Everything that I'm about to say is pretty much from her Wikipedia page, so shout out to Wikipedia. I promise I'm going to pay you someday for the great work that you do. But just a little bit, and this is tough. This is tough because Zora did so many things. She had her hands, and so she was such an intellectually curious person that it was really, really tough for me to narrow down exactly just to like a thumbnail of what she was about. But I'm going to do my best shot here. Zora was an American writer, anthropologist, folklorist, and documentary filmmaker. She portrayed life in the early 20th century American South, boy did she, and published research on hoodoo and Caribbean voodoo. The most popular of her 4 novels is Their Eyes Were Watching God, as Terri mentioned, which is a novel I think a lot of us were required to read especially here in the South, in high school, and if not in high school, in college. I think maybe freshman year in college was when I was required to read it. Their Eyes Were Watching God was published in 1937. She also wrote more than 50 short stories, plays, an autobiography, ethnographies, and many essays. She was born January 7th, 1891, although she often shaved 10 years off of her life and claimed it was 1901. Was that funny? Did you run into that in any of the reading? I thought that was so funny because, A, it's just so understandable. I mean, there were practical reasons for it that we'll get into later, but I love genealogy and doing research on people's family trees. And I just thought that was funny because that time frame, it was incredibly common for women to take a few years off of their age. Like when I do people's family trees, it's more common than not that if they have a great-grandma or grandma around that time frame, that she's fudged, like she'll be one age on one census and then miraculously younger on the census 10 years down the road. So I thought that was funny. She was originally from Nostagula, Alabama, but she liked to claim Eatonville, Florida, where she moved when she was 3 as her hometown. Zora was fluid with her. She liked to play fast and loose with her own mythos, which, hey, you know what? Go for it, girl.
It belongs to her.
Exactly. And the reason that she did that, though, was that Eatonville was the first all-black town, which she was incredibly proud of. It was the first town that was founded and governed solely by African Americans, and it figured prominently in much of her later writings. Like, that was the setting for Their Eyes Are Watching God, and we both listened to her biography this week, and she was very, very proud of the town that she was born in, or was raised in. She moved there when she was 3, so she might as well have been from there. But she was a leading figure in the Harlem Renaissance, which was a high point in American history for black writers. However, her own feelings about race were decidedly complex and ambiguous, which was a shock to me, and we will get to that later. Zora struggled later in life to find publishers, and in the last decade of her life, she suffered from ill health and died of complications from a stroke and hypertensive heart disease in the welfare home in Port St. Lucie, Florida on January 28, 1960. She was buried in an unmarked grave until writer Alice Walker found what she believed to be her final resting place in 1973 and paid out of her own pocket, which she did not have the money at the time, for a marker. So, yeah, that is the very, very basic nutshell of who Zora is, but she was such an expansive person that it almost feels like a sin to try to narrow her down into such a small microcosm of just things that a list of things that she did. What I really loved in the last couple of weeks, like I said, that I've just been eating, breathing, sleeping Zora Neale Hurston, is that I found that she was so relatable to me as a person who felt like from birth that she was almost always completely set apart from the rest of humanity. Does that make sense?
Totally.
Like, did you fall in love with little nerd Zora?
Little Zora is my absolute favorite. Sniblets.
Yes.
I'm going to call her.
Yeah.
We can talk about why. But yeah, I loved her. I just fell in love with her. If I don't have kids and never really wanted to, but if I had, I mean, she just is the ideal child to me. She's curious, imaginative, bold, daring.
Yeah, just like saw the world as her playground, like from very early on. And not because she was born into privilege, it was completely I mean, in some ways you could say that for an African American child of her time, in some ways she was privileged. She was raised in a community where the mayor was at one point her father. He was the minister of the Baptist church. They had, for the time, a very nice home. She did have some protections from things like that, but her father didn't like her. He was, disappointed that she was a daughter from the time she was born. She was very bold and she pushed back against him a lot. She was lucky in that her mother was the opposite of her father. She encouraged her spirit. She encouraged her boldness and her curiosity of the world. But I mean, she definitely, from the moment she came out, was a square peg in a round hole. And I identified a lot with that. And I thought about you listening to her autobiography, Dust Tracks on a Road, and I thought, you too, I remember us when we were younger, and when I first met you, you were a couple of years older than me in high school, and I was scared freshman year. It was a time where I was realizing that I was pretty different from everybody around me. And like coming to the point, I mean, I guess it's something that I always knew. You know, I was raised pretty poor, and there was a lot of violence around me, and I just was never a violent person. I make that, and I feel like my mother listening to this is somewhere like, you're making it sound like you were raised in like, you know, some kind of like Afghani prison or something. And it wasn't like that, but I mean, just we were very poor, and the reality is that poverty breeds a lot of violence and hardness. And I was a sensitive kid, and sensitive in the way that I was just always thinking about things, nature, why things are the way they are, and questions just were not always welcomed. They were genuinely annoying to people most of the time rather than encouraged. Did you remember the part where she was talking about falling in love with the trees and how she had this whole game of talking to nature? She felt like she could hear nature.
Mm-hmm. And she had a special tree, and I forget what she named it. She
gave
it a name.
Yeah, but I had the same, the loving tree, I think is what it was called.
You're right.
And I had that like exact same experience. Like there's a tree that was in my parents' yard until very recently that just got cut down a few years ago, and I remember just being under that tree and thinking like, man, I wish I could talk to it. I wish I could be part of this. Like just the only peace it felt like I had in the world was sometimes when it was really nice outside at this time of year, maybe when you have those days where sometimes it's 70, 75 degrees, which does not last long here in Tennessee. Usually it's somewhere between freezing and hell as far as the temperature goes, but you would have those days where everything is blooming and it's just, you feel so expansive and you feel like you're just so much a part, and you just, that's the closest I've come to feeling real peace and really part of like the beauty of the world, which sounds silly to even say, but I think you know what I mean.
Absolutely.
And I think Zora knew exactly what I mean, and that was surprising for me to find when listening to her autobiography, that, you know, that's where she found community, and she didn't necessarily see herself in the people that surrounded her, the community that surrounded her. She didn't see herself represented. And she, you know, some people could become very hard from that, but Zora became a world adventurer. Like instead, her heart became more expansive. You know, she was beaten, she fought, she talks a lot about fighting. My kids laugh all the time because I used to get into fist fights all the time when I was a kid. And I hated it. I hated every single time I had to do it. My heart was racing, my blood was pumping, I was terrified. But you learn very early on that you either fight or you are the victim. And one of the things that I shared with her is like, you know, you think about, I've described like this very dreamy person, and you think that that's the kind of person that's going to be trampled on. But for whatever reason, I think one of the things that I had in common with her is that I was not going to ever let life beat me down. And so you become as hard as you need to become. And I don't know. I'm having a hard time really encapsulating what I find so magical about her is that she became very tough. Like one of my favorite quotes that I read of hers is that it was something along the lines of she never felt like a victim. She was too busy sharpening her oyster spoon to fight back. And I identified with that so much. So I don't know. Did you see any of yourself as a child?
I do see what you're saying. Definitely. I think what she had was not toughness necessarily, because she was very soft in a lot of ways, very curious and guileless. But I think what she had was an incredibly strong will.
Yes.
From the moment that she arrived on this planet, she knew what she wanted, and no one was going to tell her anything different.
Yeah.
So I think all of those people who said, no, you can't, no, this isn't proper, you can't be this way, you can't do those things, made her want to do them more, made her want to ask more questions, do more things, see more of life.
Right.
She was not going to be beaten down by anyone.
Right. And I admire I felt such a kindred with that. And I don't want to put myself on some kind of pedestal to say that I am in any way, shape, or form on the same level as Zora Neale Hurston, but it's just something that I joke all the time that I have an inner Karen, because like no matter what life has thrown at me, I've never felt like it was my fault that I might have these challenges or setbacks. I'm not My biggest fear, and I've said this before, and I think I've told you this before, is not death. My biggest fear is being on my deathbed and looking back and thinking, I wish that I had been the person that I wanted to be. And she did that. She did that from birth, seemingly. Which is why I can kind of forgive her for fudging about whatever facts she wants to with her biography, because I think inside she always knew exactly who she was. Didn't matter what the world thought. Zora knew the story that she wanted to tell, and she was the master of that story, and I was blown away by that. I didn't expect to feel that kind of a kindred with her. One of the things I thought was really amazing about her was that she was so interested in humanity. She wasn't, I knew she was a gifted author because I read Their Eyes Were Watching God, and I did know that she was an anthropologist, and that's actually where I really started to become interested in Zora. I read, again, Their Eyes Were Watching God back in college, but I honestly think I was too young. A lot of it went over my head. I don't think I really appreciated her genius at that point. I loved it. I could tell that I thought that her use of language was beautiful, but I didn't really grasp what she was trying to say or do with that novel. But I've always said, if I could have had a different life, I would have been a sociologist or an anthropologist. I've always been interested in human nature, and I've never, I think part of what is wrong with the world today, and probably always, is that people are animals, and we have this tendency to see whatever it is that we think is normal as our tribe as the only correct way of being. And what struck me so forcefully about her was that I could recognize that she was like me in that she didn't necessarily look around at the people in her immediate vicinity and just think this is how all people are supposed to be. And I knew that she was a sociologist because I found her work for the WPA when she was doing anthropological work. If you go on I don't know if it's still there, but if you go in the National Archives, it used to be that you could find the work that she and a lot of other people did, where they went and interviewed some of the last remaining people in the 30s that had been born into slavery and record their stories. And I spent a lot of time a few years back reading those stories. I did not realize that this was a passion for her, and that was just one project that she had done, that this was really more than being a novelist. What drove her was this immense love of humanity and all of humankind and all of the different ways that you can be human. So that was something that over the last couple of weeks that I've just really enjoyed being in Zora's sphere, in Zora's face.
Well, and I think you see that in her novels as well, though, right? Like the people that she writes about are so fully fleshed, that they're completely whole and realized. And I think I love the story that she tells. It's in I think it's in Dust Tracks, because that's what I've been listening to recently. Yeah. And when she's a kid and she has a corn husk that she turns into Mrs. Corn Husk. I'm not going to remember that right. But then she has a bar of soap that she turns into the corn husk boyfriend. Yeah. And then he lives in a drawer and she lives under the house, and all these other sort of household items become other community members. And she's always building this cast of characters, right? Even as a child. Yeah.
She's multitudes within herself.
Correct. Yeah. But I think she was reflecting the people that she knew, as we all do. I mean, we are only the product of those from whence we came. Right. And I think she was just reflecting those people, but it was so adorable, and I wanted to know what happens to Miss Cornhusk, right? Where does Mr. Soap live, and why is he sleeping in the drawer,
But the thing that I thought was really I wondered about your experience of reading that is that it reminded me of Baby Mandy and Baby Terri, and I don't know if you remember this, but one of the ways that we first became close friends back then was we both had this deep love of folklore and fairy tales and different cultures. And I remember I was going through this Celtic phase, and most people that I would try to talk to about the fact that I had found out that Blodgwood was the name for owls and it meant flower face would look at me with this Right. But you were like, that is so fascinating.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I guess it's just this idea that I think one of the things that we all have in common is that you, Zora, and I are people that are not necessarily tribal. We just see humanity as our tribe, you know? Like,
yes.
I don't know what the difference is, why we were born that way, because I think most people don't operate that way.
I think it's rooted in curiosity.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
I think it's rooted in curiosity. I've always been a curious person. I've always wondered, what's going on over there?
Right.
Why does that look different than what I know? And what is that all about?
Right. And not necessarily with a judgment.
No, just wanting to understand.
Yeah.
And wanting to adventure. It feels like an adventure to learn.
Right.
To me.
Right.
I think it's why I've always loved reading and literature. It's an adventure. It's a trip in the mind. And Zora did trips in real life. I mean, she was an adventurer. She was an explorer, and that's always been extremely attractive to me.
But she had to bring herself to. I mean, like, the odds were not in her favor.
No, and I don't think that was what she didn't grow up thinking like, ooh, I want to be an ethnographer.
Yeah.
But I think it just, she was given the opportunities because she was a bright, intelligent, curious woman. And she found joy.
Yeah.
And purpose.
And I guess that's like the fascinating thing is like that I just don't believe that 99 out of 100 people would have been born into the circumstances that she was born into and had the life that she ended up having. I mean, there were so many reasons, her mom dying early, her dad really disliking her, genuinely disliking her, being violently abusive to her in certain situations, and the fact that she had to leave school when she was like 13 years old, and that could have been the end of it,
Sure.
And you kind of think, like, I think about some of the women that I know that I grew up with that, that is kind of like the death of curiosity for them, is when, like, maybe they started out with those same kind of bright-eyed, optimistic ideas or, curiosity about the world, but something beat it out of them. And she just didn't let that happen. And she just kept pushing, I mean, that's part of why I was talking about her fudging her age. Part of the reason that she did that was because she had to lie to get into Baltimore public schools so that she could finally finish her education. She was in her 20s at that point.
Right. Well, and she talks about in several places just this sort of clawing thing inside of her that she had to pursue, right?
Yeah.
She never really defines it as like, I needed to do anthropology, but she talks about this person that she knew she wanted to be, and she wasn't there yet, and she wasn't going to stop until she pursued that, whatever it was. And I think that's, ultimately why she got where she got.
Yeah.
Not great English there, but
no.
it is.
But yeah, no. I mean, well, Zora was not a grammarian, neither am I.
I'm a bit of an English language nerd, but
yeah, me too. But I try really hard not to let my self-editor get too involved there. And again, we could take this back to Zora. I think that that's part of the lesson there. She got criticized a lot when I don't want to skip too far ahead, but when she did write Their Eyes Were Watching God, she got a lot of criticism for the fact that she wrote in vernacular, which at the time, a lot of people, black and white, felt like was not portraying black people in the best light. But she, I think, innately saw humanity as one and all cultures are relevant, and then had that reinforced when she met Franz Boas, which I'm going to get into in a minute because I knew Franz Boas previous to studying about Zora, and it was kind of interesting to me to know that those two guys were
they connected.
Yeah, that they connected. It was like, when you're at a party and you're like, oh my God, Becky,
Right.
Yeah, so it was really fun for me to find that out. But I think you're right that it was that innate curiosity about the world that kind of like helped her to have the drive to do what she needed to do. And so, like, to further the narrative and to give you a little bit more information, listeners, about Zora, once she got through, had her mom died when she was 13. She went away to a boarding school in Jacksonville that her sister was already attending, but her dad immediately remarried. And when I say immediately, I mean he remarried within a couple of weeks of her mother passing away. away, which devastated Zora. She was very, very close to her mother, and that was really hard for her. And then on top of that, her stepmother did not like her, and she was forced to leave school because they just stopped paying her tuition. So she just kind of was rattled around for several years after that. She ended up becoming the maid of a woman who was I believe it was Gilbert and Sullivan opera that she was doing. It was basically like vaudeville, it was like traveling performers before media or movies and television. And she took that opportunity, and because she was so charming and funny and interesting and bright and quick, and she was such a chameleon, she was immediately able to make herself part of that group. Like, she just loved that experience. She jumped right into it, and she became part of the group. And so from that, woman that hired her, who was from an old Boston family, was able to get her introduced to people who helped her to further her education. And then once she got into college, Barnard College, she met Franz Boas, who was one of the people that was a leading light for anthropology in America, and really I don't want to act like I'm super educated. It's like Zora, I'm just interested in a lot of things, but I did take a class, an anthropology class not too long ago, and I really kind of fell in love with Franz Boas because he was one of the first anthropologists to introduce this idea of cultural relativism, which I know a lot of really conservative people hate to hear because they like to believe that there are superior societies out there. And, we can look at things that are good and bad in certain societies, things that cause harm or whatnot, but he was a big believer in looking at societies basically as an outsider, just from the idea that all societies have value and merit that you don't want to be judgmental about.
Intrinsic value.
Exactly. And you don't want to be judgmental about people's belief systems or how they operate. You want to go into them and study them from the place that they are coming from. And that really spoke to Zora. And they had a very, very close relationship. He had a huge impact on who she became later on. And I thought that was amazing. I thought that was wonderful. And I think that it really is the reason that relationship is part of the reason that she was both able to have a very expansive life and to suck the marrow out of pretty much anywhere that she landed. But I also think is why she maybe struggled to stay relevant in a culture that was swiftly changing, the African-American culture in the United States. This was just at the very beginning of the Civil Rights era. And I think that's part of why she almost fell into obscurity, because it led her fierce individualism kind of got her in trouble with
she did not conform.
Exactly.
She did not conform to the soup in which
yeah.
she was living,
yeah,
for lack of a better word. I mean, Harlem Renaissance is fascinating, and there's so many people to talk about there, and she was friends with many of them. But I think I read something today that I found sad but also not shocking, is that the majority of her critics were men.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that says a lot.
I mean, sorry, I realize we're on the radio, quote unquote, here, and I just gave you a face, but you can imagine the face I just made.
Women can.
Yeah. Love our men listeners. Good for you. Be an ally.
yeah, I think you're right. I think part of it was being male. I also think being Southern had a lot to do with it. So this is part of what I ran into with, I was in basically just this love fest with Zora as I was reading her biography and reading about all of her adventures and reading about the many things that she did and that she accomplished and her loves and her, passions. And then we did run to the point where I had to start confronting the very real differences that she and I have as far as how we see civil rights. Did you really read into any of that?
Yes, I did read it, and I thought to myself as I was contemplating this podcast, that's going to be a tricky subject for me to talk about as a white woman. I don't really want to have that conversation, but I mean,
there's no way to not have it.
I don't think I'm not going to have an opinion on whether she was right or wrong or what she did, but she certainly was not in the mainstream at the time, nor would she be in the mainstream today. But I do think what's interesting about her position, which I'll let you clarify what that is, But I do think what's interesting about her position is that it's so framed by her lived experience, right? Like, she had somewhat of a singular lived experience for a Black woman in America in that time, possibly even in any time. She lived in a town that was governed, run, and populated by African Americans. There was no, she was living under Jim Crow technically, but it wasn't a factor in her life as a child. She didn't really experience it until she went to school in Jacksonville. And I think that just deeply shaped how she saw who she was. And I feel like she didn't see herself in that narrative that she was being told was the right narrative.
Yeah.
And so it just never felt right for her. And again, that sort of stubborn will of hers, she was not a conformist.
Yeah, she was not. And I struggled at first, like you said. I mean, like, immediately, as a white woman who is exquisitely aware that the world does not need to hear any more
Right.
white people's opinions about race relations in this country, I really struggled with it, because there's no way we can not talk about it, because she did have an impact, whether she wanted to be part of that conversation or not. And I think she did. I don't think she...
Well, and it had an impact on her, to be
Right.
clear. Like, I think it is a big part of why she does not have the platform that she should.
Yeah.
Based on, the merits of her work.
Yeah, I agree. And at first I was a little mad at her, because even though, again, as you said, I don't have a right to be mad at her. I do
Maybe
not.
we should clarify what her position is before we go further.
Yeah. So Zora did not believe in integration. She was not a big believer in desegregation. And that's not even correct. It's not that she didn't believe in desegregation. She didn't believe in the way that it was being, in her mind, rolled out. She died in 1960, so she really did not live through the height of the civil rights movement. But they were already talking about desegregation, and again, as Terri pointed out, Zora was born and raised, or almost born and raised, in an almost exclusively Black society. She felt no lack for being a Black woman. She did not feel the stigma of her Blackness and what that meant in Jim Crow America until she was already a teenager, because everyone that was in a position of authority in her life was a Black person. She had a few white people that were around, but none of them were ugly or hateful or, outwardly judgmental to her. There was a really cool story about the white man that attended her birth. Her mother gave birth when she was, her father was away and she was alone. And the way that Zora tells the story, she and Zora both could have died. But there was a white man who lived near them who knew that that her father was away, and he had slaughtered a pig and wanted to bring some food to the family to make sure that they were okay, or that they had food while the father was away, and came upon her mother having just given birth to her. He cut the cord and wrapped Zora up and kept her warm until somebody could come and, chop the firewood, help them up, and he and Zora developed a relationship after that through her young childhood. I don't know how much of that could have been super accurate, because again, she did move from Alabama when she was 3 years old, but Florida and Alabama, I should have looked to see how far Nasagola is from Eatonville, but she still had family back there, so it could be that she visited and that's when she saw that gentleman, but she had a great relationship with him. So she had mostly positive experiences with white people through most of her childhood. Limited really is the best word. So she really did not, and as somebody who was an anthropologist, she really tended to view cultures as an outsider. And again, I want to reiterate, that's one of the things that I feel like I had the most in common with her, because I've never really felt like I'm part of I tend to view cultures from the outside and to see humans as like a collection of behaviors, or this is why they do that, that or the other. And I understand that, but it's really difficult for me to get my mind around the fact that when she left that little enclave, and maybe it's because she immediately went north not immediately, but pretty quickly, she went north. It may be that she just didn't run into Jim Crow a whole lot. But then I go back and I'm like, but I've read in some of her writings where she talks about like the extremely horrible racism that like some of her characters and their eyes are watching God. I mean, she, I can't fully get my mind around how she can not understand or could not understand that sometimes it's time to, I'm not a joiner myself, but for instance, in our current political climate, there are things that I find nuance in that I have had to let that nuance go because we are in a desperate situation as far as certain civil rights go. And so that's the part that I kind of am not, still can't really grasp, is that I saw a lot of old Mandy before 2016 in Zora's political thoughts. I don't know if you remember a lot about, because I know we've had a lot of political conversations. I used to be a Republican. I was a Republican for most of my life, for about 30 years. And largely it was because I was able to see the nuance, or at least I thought, that I, in a lot of things, as far as like the pro-life movement, having been a child that was born to a single mom, who I should have been, the statistic of a kid that was aborted. I used to see a lot of nuance in that. But now we're in a situation where you have men like Donald Trump making health choices for women. And so I guess that's my thought process with Zora, and why it's very difficult for me to really grasp where she was coming from with a lot of this kind of almost relativism about we're all human, is that is true, but you had a situation where some humans could go stay in beautiful hotels and get service and, all of that. And then some people had to go walk around to the back of the store if they were allowed to get service at all. And those were the people that looked like her. So I just, to a certain degree, I still don't fully grasp how she could let that go.
Yeah, I totally see where you're coming from. And I get that. I don't know. I don't think we can know, the inner workings of her mind, but I wonder if it had something to do with accepting those things made her change her feeling of who she was.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
That is exactly...
Like, in order to accept that those things were real and happening and important and needed to be addressed, somehow made her feel that it changed her history in some way that felt unacceptable.
That's exactly where I came to too, Terri. I feel like, and I'm going to go back a little bit, because I'm going to say that where I finally found purchase is that I recognize that one of the things that I think she and I have in common is that I had to accept early on, like one of the things that used to drive me crazy back when I was a single issue voter, and that issue basically being the pro-life movement, is that I felt like it was very insulting to act as if women, because the statistic around abortion is that, most of the abortions, as far as, and again, I was very naive. I want to be very clear here that I have a much more nuanced opinion about all of this now, but I would read the statistics about abortion, and statistically, just from the data that was gathered, most of abortions were elective. It was not necessarily a situation of the mother's health or the health of the child or rape or incest or anything like that. It was, in my mind, it was convenience. And so to me, it felt very insulting to say that a woman should not be held accountable for her own actions. If she chose to have sexual relations and that ended in a pregnancy, then in my mind, it was, why are you not taking responsibility for that action? I've never wanted to be a victim. Like my whole life, because of the circumstances of how I was born and how I was raised, I could have been a statistic, and I never, ever, ever, ever want anyone to look at me and see a victim of anything. And I think that is the key to understanding her mindset. But again, I guess where I get off the train is that eventually I grew up and I came out of that, and I recognized that whether I like it or not, I am part of a vulnerable community. Part of it was having my daughter, but also just seeing this world that we are living in now where and I think that's part of it too, is that when I mentioned that Zora really died before the real heat of the civil rights movement kicked off, is that I don't think that she could envision the world as it is now. Like, she could only know the world that she knew to that point. And to that point, I think it made her feel too much like a victim to say that black people needed to ask white people for anything.
Right. I feel like it seemed that she felt it stole her agency in life.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, it stole her ability to choose how she moved in the world.
Right.
It seems that simple. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure it's not, but it just feels like it was more about how she wanted to see herself.
Yeah.
And less about, anything outside of that.
And there's some practical reasons too. I mean, one of her arguments was like, and one of the things that really got her in hot water with some of her colleagues was that she was actively campaigning for a segregationist politician, a white segregationist politician in Florida. But her argument was the other side keeps talking about building schools for black kids. He's actually done it. And she went to black schools and she felt like those schools were excellent.
Right.
And I've honestly seen some other discourse in the last few years talking about how a lot of the segregationist black schools had excellent teachers, and that is one of the arguments, is that when segregation happened or desegregation happened, there were one of the casualties of that is black teachers.
Right.
You could force integration, but you could not force white schools to hire black teachers.
Well, she clearly says in Dust Tracks on a Road that she felt it was an insult.
Yeah.
An insult to black schools and black teachers and black educators.
Right. And she wasn't wrong about that, because again, history is borne out, if you read about it, that a lot of black teachers, excellent black teachers, had to lose their careers because white schools would not hire them. And part of the result of that is that you had a lot of white kids. I mean, as white kids, we grew up in the busing era, so we heard a lot about, oh gosh, my poor white kid is going to be going and being surrounded by black people. But black kids had the opposite situation. They were being bussed into schools where they might be the only white or black kid, and they had no black teacher. They went from these schools where they were, surrounded by people that looked like them. They had educators that looked like them, that, had common experiences and common culture. And now, you are a black face in a sea of white people, and she was not wrong about that.
Right. And while I certainly am grateful for that whole process, was started before we came along and that we were a part of, I do think in the, when we're looking at in the long history view, it was worth it. But I think, my experience, and I'm sure yours, and I'm sure lots of kids, was that the stress of those changes in your life, and not just the changes in your life, but the teachers' changes in their lives, the disruption that it caused, I think had to account for a loss of quality in education on both sides of the coin.
And some culture. And then that was one of the things I've seen that she argued again. That was one of her arguments against integration, forced integration. She did believe, just to be clear, she did believe that eventually integration was absolutely the goal. But forced integration was her problem. She had a lot of concerns about government overreach, and she felt like there was going to be key parts of black culture that were going to be lost if you forced integration. And honestly, I don't know that she was wrong about that.
I'm not sure you could argue that was incorrect.
Yeah. So that gives me some purchase to this was finding out about her politics was a bit of a I gotta take a deep breath and figure out what I want to do here, because as somebody who has really done a lot of self-examination about the way that I move in the world and the way that I voice my opinion, and when it is okay for me to do that and when I should probably shut the fuck up and sit back, it really gave me pause, because we can't not talk about it.
Right. No, I was super trepidatious about this particular part of the conversation, because my opinion is so irrelevant here.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. No one needs it, and I don't.
Right.
Yeah, I was nervous.
And I don't want to skip over it, but I also very much like you feel like two white ladies sitting here talking about something that really, for the most part, it involves us, but it's not our story to tell.
No.
And it's not our culture to discuss. I was worried. And so I did talk to several of my black friends and biracial friends to ask them for some advice here. And I want to say, black people, as Zora very, very forcefully wanted everyone, and I feel like if she's hovering over our shoulder, she wants me to reiterate, black people are not a monolith. But I did want to at least take some of the people that I know, their perspectives into consideration before we had this talk. And I just want to say to any of my friends that are listening to this, you know who you are, that I reached out to. Thank you so much for being so open, because uniformly they were like, hell yeah, I'll talk to you about this. And every single one of them said, Mandy, I feel like I'm not worried at all that you are going to be disrespectful or that you are going to be callous or that you're going to, say something that is going to be offensive. And so I appreciate that. But one of the things that surprised me a bit is talking to some of the friends that I have that are biracial. One of them particularly really agreed with everything that Zora believed. She's still in the year 2025, had no problem with anything that Zora said. She had some challenges growing up as a biracial person, and that she has some very strong feelings about how she feels like there are certain parts of the Black community that are too insular and that they have some bigotry in themselves that and I am not going to address that. I was very clear with her that we don't necessarily see eye to eye on that, but I absolutely understand why she feels the way that she does, and I feel like her opinion definitely has more weight than my opinion. But all of that to say that it helped me to get to a place where I was able to understand that I do not have the right to judge Zora Neale Hurston for her beliefs, for how she moved, for what she said, and for what she didn't say. And I also agree with you that I think a lot of the reason that she was blackballed had more to do with sexism than it really did.
Yeah, the only thing that I would say about any of that is that I admire her for being unapologetically who and what she was at all times. I think that's something
because the pressure
must have been intense.
Yeah.
I mean, her livelihood depended on benefactors, people who gave her money to go do these projects that she did, to travel, and the whole patronage system. It's another conversation, but
let's get into that though. I'm glad you brought that up, because she had this woman that she referred to as godmother throughout her...
She was required to refer to her as godmother. Let's be clear.
Right. And I really struggled with that. Like, how did she make peace with that? And I read that the article where where Alice Walker became interested in trying to revive Zora Neale Hurston's place in literary history, and she just flatly stated that she believed that Zora was playing the game, that she was doing what she had to do to get patronage, and Alice didn't judge her for that at all, which again made me feel like, where do I have the right to judge her?
Right. Well, WPA was such a far-reaching program, and it supported her in a lot of her works, which is why we have such amazing resources of hers in the Library of Congress, which now I want to go.
It's really, really interesting.
But once the WPA was gone, there's really not, she's no longer in the, not that she's chosen not to be, she was not allowed to be in the collegiate system. When she went to Columbia, African Americans weren't even allowed to be students there. She was just pulled in because Frank Boas wanted her.
Right.
And so they made that work. But there were no outlets. There was no government funding once the WPA disappeared. That the Foundation for the Arts had not been formed. And there was nothing. So it was a patronage system. If you wish to continue your work, it was a patronage system. Yeah. White or black, whoever you were.
Yeah, and also, though, she had made so many connections with the Harlem Renaissance, but once it really started, the civil rights movement started to heat up, most of those fellow writers were black, and, were black, but they were also male, and having completely different experiences, because men and women, whatever your race, your ethnicity, men and women just have different experiences in this world. And her trying to stand by her beliefs as far as, her ideas about the excellence of black schools, things like that, it didn't make her any, because the fad of the time was to be communist, to be more radical politically, to be just more radical, period. And she was not a radical in that way. And that was partly why she didn't have the support of her peers anymore. she lost her patronage, but she also lost, she was not popular anymore. Right. She was not, her style of communication, her style of being Black, and I hate to say that because we're two white chicks talking about this, but you very much get the feeling that her style, and I think it's something that Alice Walker flat out stated, her style of being Black was no longer in fashion. It really, in a way, reminded me of one of my favorite Alice Walker stories. It's called Everyday Use, and it's about a woman who, it was written during the height of the civil rights movement, and it was about a woman who was more militant. She, wore the dashiki, and she had the fro picked out, and she was very much into the art scene. And she went back to her little tiny southern hometown to visit her mother and her sister, and she wanted to go in and take all of the things that were faddish in the culture, the handmade quilt and the spinning wheel that her great-great-grandmother had used and things like that. She wanted to take those because she wanted to make them museum relics. But she had this sister there that never left home, who stayed. She was more dull, she was more dark, she was more, just not this great light of intellectualism. And the mother, the whole gist of the story is the mother tells her, no, you're not taking this quilt that is made for everyday use and going and hanging it up on a wall. Your sister's going to get it. You're going to, and so I don't know, in some ways I saw Zora in that, that she was, she had people that, and again, this is such a scary conversation to have because I don't want to sound judgmental of anyone else that was in the civil rights movement, but I feel like she was pitted, she became old-fashioned and she was jettisoned because...
obsolete. Yeah,
she became obsolete. And that is such a shame, to have a mind like that, to have such a huge soul just be left by the wayside because her ideals were no longer fashionable. That's just heartbreaking.
It is. It's absolutely heartbreaking because she was so influential to me. I mean, the way she uses language is...
it just speaks to your soul.
It really does. It captures you. It draws you in from the first word.
Yeah, if you are a woman, and then I'm men too, I don't mean to be exclusive there, but if you are a person who has a spirit like I think you and I do, that one of the things that's really cool to me about this project is that two things. One, I've just kind of let whoever I'm talking to every episode pick who they want to talk about. And every time so far, because this is only the second one we've recorded, but I've talked to a couple of other people that we're planning down the road. It's kind of a random thing, but then it just seems to be like fate, that the more that you dig into this person, the more that you are like, I am so glad that I know more about her. And I just kept running into that when I was doing all of that, living in Zora land the last couple of weeks, is I can see so much of both you and I in her, that in a way that we did not realize before we started this.
Well, I think something, and this just occurred to me, but I think something about her writing that appeals to me so deeply is the way she weaves fantasy into everyday life.
Yes.
And
the magic.
Right. The magic of being human.
Yeah.
I'm a huge fantasy nerd. Always loved all of that. But
Gabriel Garcia Marquez is who I kept thinking of.
Yes, absolutely. But she just, it's so seamless. It's like they just belong together. They're milk and honey,
Yeah. She loved life.
Singular.
She loved life. She loved the human experience. She, for practical purpose, I don't think, I've seen her described as an atheist. I wouldn't say that she was an atheist. She was definitely not a deist. She was not Christian. No. She was in love with all belief systems. And I recognize that, and I think that she just had a deep, deep love of the human experience in every single form that it comes on this planet. And that's part of the tragedy of why she was just tossed to the side at a certain point. And it just, I don't know, man, it breaks your heart.
Yeah.
But so one of the things before we wrap up here, because we're gonna pause here in a minute, and Terri and I are gonna whip up a incredibly delicious meal based on some of Zora's favorites, and I cannot wait for it. I'm starving. But before we get to that, one of the things that is just awful is that she did die basically alone. She was buried in a pauper's grave. She had no headstone. she was forgotten by everyone until Alice Walker brought her back to basically to life. And so I do want us to talk a little bit. I know we covered it a little bit, but when I went back this week and I listened again to Their Eyes Were Watching God, I was like, how did I not see before how this is definitely the grandmother of The Color Purple?
Right.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from the interactions between characters and the setting and the language that she uses, the vividness with which she speaks about life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that and I Googled this to see if I was right, and I was. The character of Shug Avery was inspired by Zora, because as I'm listening to her autobiography, I'm thinking, that is Shug Avery.
Yeah.
That is Shug Avery. And it's not a one-to-one ratio, but like there's so much of Shug Avery's spirit in Zora Neale Hurston. She was the daughter of a preacher who did not understand her, who judged her for the choices that she made, and she was just too big and too expansive for the little world that she was in. And when in The Color Purple, Shug Avery says, I think it pisses God off when you walk past The Color Purple and you ignore it. There are parts in Zora's writings where you can see her basically, I think that Alice Walker got that from Zora. There are times where she talks about how she feels like if God is anything, he is in the beauty of nature. He's in the buzzing of the bees. He's in the fullness of the spring, and just that passion for life and living just makes it even more tragic that this woman passed with in poverty with how do you go from being one of the leaders of the Harlem Renaissance to having to work as a maid at 60? It's just,
and one of the allegories between Shug Avery and Zora, to me, that I just realized today when I was listening to the end of Dust Tracks, is her relationship with her second husband was truly love, just a passionate meeting of souls.
Yeah,
but he was threatened by her need to find fulfillment outside of his relationship with her.
Yeah, and
she chose herself.
Yeah,
and
I'm so glad you brought that up.
A bold choice. In 1934 or whenever it was early 30s.
Yeah, I think it was 34.
To choose as a woman, white or black at that moment, choosing your career, choosing your passion over your spouse, over his need for you to find complete fulfillment in him.
Yeah.
Was just I'm so impressed and so in awe, and not because she didn't love him, because she wasn't passionate.
She did.
She absolutely did.
That's part of the tragedy.
I don't think she ever. I think she remarried after that. She has 4 marriages over the course of her life, but I don't think she ever stopped loving him.
Yeah.
And
he was the basis of TK in
Their Eyes Were Watching God. And yet, she continued to choose herself, and I just respect that so much. But I think it's a great allegory with Shug in that she did the same thing. She chose her career over
Mr. Albert.
Mr. Yeah. She chose her career over her relationship with Mr., who she clearly loved.
Or even her own father. Right. She chose her version of life over being the good daughter, for being what she was expected to be in that day and age. I think it's a bold thing to do in 2025. I can't even imagine the courage that it would take.
And we just go back to the thing that I think overall I find so compelling about her is that she knew what she wanted from childhood. She knew where her passions lied. She knew what she wanted. She had this
wanderlust,
inalienable sense of direction.
Yeah. And
she followed it.
Yeah.
At all costs.
Yeah.
And I admire the hell out of that.
Man, how many of us can say we've done that, Very few.
Very few.
Yeah. Well, all right. So we are going to pause here for just a bit, and Terri and I are going to do a little bit of cooking, and then we are going to come back and have some more talk while we enjoy this delicious meal inspired by Zora. All right, y'all, we are back. We are plated up and getting ready to enjoy this delicious meal that is based on recipes that we know that Zora enjoyed. And actually, according to her biographer, this was her actual favorite meal. So, Terri, do you want to tell us what we're having?
Sure. So we're having fried shrimp with a cornmeal batter, some greens with pot liquor, some cornbread, and some mulatto rice. Oh, and fried okra.
Yes. The mulatto rice is, I'm sure there's a much more politically correct term for that, but that's just the only term that I could find, and that's what Zora called it. And it was the rice that Janie's friend Phoebe fed to her when she first came back to town in the beginning of Their Eyes Are Watching God. So that's why we chose this menu. I want to give apologies to my first dinner guest on the Eleanor Roosevelt episode, Zara.
You got shortchanged.
You did, Zara. I am so sorry because I got to tell you that this is freaking delicious. Southern food is the best food in the world, and Zora was a Southern woman through and through. If she was identified as anything more than just Zora herself, I think a woman of the South is, and actually, that's one of the things I meant to bring up earlier, is that's one of the things that Alice Walker chose to put on her grave marker was Genius of the South, because she was very much a product of her time and place. So, what do you think about it?
Your greens are amazing. So
Thank
let's
you.
start there. Best thing on the plate.
Thank you.
The mulatto rice is interesting. I do think it's representative of the kinds of food that Southerners ate. In those times when work was much more physical. This is
Heavy.
basically, it's super heavy. So it's basically rice that's been cooked in bacon grease. So it definitely has a really nice bacony flavor, but it's just really like, this is some stick to your ribs kind of stuff. This is go out and work in the field afterwards, work at the sawmill, work at the wherever, doing hard physical labor all day.
Yeah.
I am not going to have very much of that because I'm already half full, and I'm pretty sure that's going to make me feel like crap.
Yeah, we got really full kind of already just nibbling while we were cooking and chatting.
The shrimp is great. I mean, who doesn't like fried shrimp? That's just
For sure.
not much to say about that. It's pretty good.
You did a great job, too. I have to tell you, I had Terri cook the shrimp because I'm ashamed to admit this, as a Southern woman, I have never been able to get batter to stick to anything I've fried ever in my life. I don't know why. It's like some people have a green thumb and some people kill every plant that comes in their way. I'm a fairly good cook, but I have just never been able to fry anything without my batter sliding right off. So Terri did a great job. And the okra, oh man. If you guys don't like fried okra, I don't know what to tell you.
I did not like fried okra as a kid.
Really?
We had it all the time, and it can be so slimy on the inside.
Yeah.
So if you don't like okra, what I would suggest is that you roast whole okra in the oven. You can toss it in oil and spices and roast it in the oven, and it is not slimy at all. So if your aversion to okra is the slime, which is impossible to avoid.
Yeah.
Once you start cutting okra, the slime comes right along. But roasting, it's not slimy. So
I'll try it that way. I like okra. I like okra, but
I also like okra.
I like okra and okra.
Yeah.
But I have never liked any version, like boiled okra is disgusting
so
to me.
Slimy.
Yeah.
So slimy.
Speaking of, like, I don't know why, but it always reminds me of boiled peanuts, which is another Southern thing that I just can't stand.
Oh, no, that's never been.
They're mushy. I just don't get it. Well, anyway, this is delicious. So while we were cooking, we were talking a little bit more about the complexity that I ran into in trying to really reframe some of my thoughts about Zora when I realized that her political beliefs were just kind of surprising to me and don't necessarily align with the way that I understand things to have worked, or the way that I believed that she would think. And part of where I found purchase was realizing that I needed to let go of judging her. And Terri had something really interesting to say about that.
Well, it was something that I came across when I was going over dust tracks on a road. understanding something and judging something cannot exist in the same space, right? If you are judging something, then you've already made a decision about it. You've already have an opinion about it. And it's very difficult to seek to understand something for its own merit if you've already judged it.
Yeah. And I think that is a big part of her character. I mean, one of the things we got into, and I was really hesitant to try to talk about, as much as I was hesitant to bring up the racial issue, but it is part of her character, is that there is a lot of casual violence against women in her writing and in some of her relationships. And I had a hard time with that. But as Terri pointed out, you know, that was just the reality for a lot of women back in that time. I mean, it wasn't uncommon for women to feel like, you know, that was a way that a man showed you that he loved you, was if he slapped you around a little bit to let you know that he didn't want you talking to other men, which is hard to understand from a modern perspective. But she was very, very genuinely a product of where she was from,
of her very particular upbringing.
Yeah.
And I think, like it or not, all of us, our worldview is largely shaped by the reference that we have as children, our parents, the people we know in our communities, our aunts, our uncles, the families that we see and how they operate in the world. You know, we can certainly grow beyond that and have other experiences and craft our own opinions about them, but I do think that was widely accepted.
Yeah.
It was maybe not ideal. I don't think everyone saw it as like the perfect thing, but I think it was widely practiced.
Yeah.
At best.
Quietly accepted in most ways.
Quietly accepted.
It reminds me of my great-grandmother, who I will be doing an episode about one day. That woman really shaped a lot of my worldview, because I think, like Zora and like all the people that I admire the most, she was an iconoclast. She was somebody who was of her time in certain ways, but also very much beyond the norm of what she was. She wasn't one to just, like Zora, just accept things on their merit. She needed to question and go and see, and she wanted to put her opinion out there because she had a very good brain and she was going to use it. Anyway, she wrote, when she realized that she was becoming senile towards the last few years of her life, she started writing out her life story. And she was born in 1901. When she started writing out her life story in this book for us to find at some, and it's my most prized possession now, but she told this story. I was just rereading it recently, and this would have been 1918. She was 17 years old. She had just married my grandfather, Sewell, and they were living with her mother and father, because I think people these days, that's an interesting thing. Like, a lot of people think that it's the norm that people got married and immediately moved out. That's actually and lived on their own. That's a very new concept. Back before the last couple of generations, it was much more common for people to live with multiple generations in a home. So as they were starting out, they were living with her mother and father and grandparents, and her mother just adored my grandfather, but she was gone to the store one day and they got to arguing about something, and he slapped her, and she got a butcher knife. And the way she described it just makes me laugh. I just barely cut him, and he was making the biggest deal about it, and her mother came home, and her mother yelled at her for cutting him. And she said, if the son of a bitch wants to live, he'll never put hands on me again. And they were happily married, for the most part, for another almost 6 years after that. And he never laid hands on her again. But even her own mother thought that she should have just accepted that was just something that men did occasionally. Right.
Well, and Zora's mother accepted it.
Yeah.
From her husband.
Yeah. Yeah.
And while I think Zora didn't see her mother as weaker for having tolerated that, I think she saw the defiance that her mother was able to put forward.
Like, it's not going to kill you. Like, a little beating's not
right, but
not
I
the
think,
end of the world.
But yeah, I think it just was normalized, right?
Yeah.
And anything, whether good or ill, when normalized, it can be very difficult to feel like you have agency to fight against it.
Right. Or even, I don't
want
know.
to.
Yeah, or even want to. If you've accepted that is part of love and loving, then it is what it is. And I'm going to let go of judgment of that. I'm going to let go of judgment of that, because I think, by and large, one of the things that we've said over and over again that we admire about her is that she was able to look at people for who they are, not for who they should be, and to love them for that, not for some idealized version of who they should be. And so I'm going to suspend judgment on all of that stuff. But another thing that Terri and I were talking about that I thought was really interesting, and I wanted her to talk a little bit more about, is that what we have here in the South that we used to have is community. There used to be a lot more necessity that we all know each other, and we all know our neighbors, that we all have community with our neighbors because we depended on each other. So
right. Well, I don't even think that I experienced this in my childhood to the extent that Zora talks about it in her books. There's a passage in the cookbook that you bought, and I am sorry, I don't remember the name of it. But
it was I think it's called Florida Cooking. It's a cookbook that,
I think that's right.
Yeah, it was a cookbook that was based on, it was written by a white guy in the 90s, but it was based on some of the recipes that she would have grown up. We ended up not using any of the recipes from the book, but
well, that's not true. We did make the Haitian sweet potato pudding, which we've totally forgotten to get out of the
sweet
freezer.
Potato pudding.
But we'll get that.
Yeah.
So anyway, they were talking about in the winter it would be time to slaughter hogs, and so for all of those vegetarians out there, I'm terribly sorry. But so it just got me thinking about seasonal eating and how. We're just so disconnected from seasons and the earth and, anything that represents like actual food sources and those kinds of things. But the thing that I thought was it's nostalgia for something that I've never known, to be honest. And I don't want to be one of those people who's like, everything was better back then, because that's 100% not true.
For sure it wasn't, but I do agree with you that nuance is lost now.
Right. But I do think there is value in a sense of community, right? And value in feeling needed and needing your neighbors and knowing your neighbors and being known by people in your community. And I think that's something that sort of hog slaughtering passage represented, is the whole community comes together for a purpose. It's both fun, it's, a necessity. You can't slaughter a bunch of hogs with one person. You've got to have the whole community come together. Mm-hmm. It makes the work faster. Everyone, all the women would cook and all the men would slaughter the hogs, and everyone had their purpose, and everyone was needed. And I feel like that's something that we're missing in life today, and I wonder how things would be different if we weren't missing that interconnectivity with our
with our
community,
world, with our food,
world.
with our neighbors, all of that, with nature. One of the stories that we didn't really get into from Zora's biography, she was telling the story of her birth, and her mother almost died, according to Zora. She and Zora both almost died. Her father had been out of town working, and there was a white man who lived very near to them, and imagine this is in the late 1800s, so this is one of the stories of the Old South that, because of all of the awfulness and tragedies that came before and after, sometimes these stories of how we have always lived side by side here get lost. And Zora tells this story about this man, a white man, who lived near their community. And this was before they moved to Eatonville, where it was an all-black community. So it certainly doesn't seem like this would be the norm. But he knew that Zora's father was out of town and that her mother was close to her time for delivering. And so he came by to check and found that she had the baby but was too weak to even reach down to pick her up after birth. And so he cleaned her up, helped her cut the umbilical cord, wrapped the baby up, got the mother clean. And by the time one of the neighborhood women were there, he was, rocking the baby and taking care of her. And then after that, they, according to Zora, they became good friends. She kept in touch with this man up until he died when she was like 9 or 10 years old. And she felt very close to him. And she felt like he was one of the biggest influences in her childhood. And, it is sad that those complexities, that those nuances of life down here get lost, and I think that that's part of the beauty of her, is how she was able to see, with all of the reasons that she could have to hate and be angry at the world, she chose instead to see everybody's common humanity. And I think that's the most brilliant thing about her.
Right. She saw each person as an individual instead of a part of a collective that she had already decided
to hate or to have her. Right, yeah. And there's just so few of us that can do that. And I think we're going to wrap her up here, because I think that's the takeaway there, is that when you go looking for Zora, like Alice Walker did, thank God, in the 70s, you're going to find somebody who is wholly and completely an individual and wholly and completely lived life on her own terms, even as we pointed out earlier and talked about, is that meant that she ended up dying in obscurity, so that she could hold on to her vision of how life should be. And while that is certainly not the way that we wish that her final years had gone, I can't help but feel like Zora didn't regret 1 minute.
No, I think unapologetic is the best way to describe. She did everything in life without regret.
Yeah, she was wholly her own person. So yeah, this has been an awesome chat. Thank you so much, Terri, for doing this with me.
Thank you for having me.
It's been great. I've loved it. I've definitely loved dinner more than I did.
We're going to go get that sweet potato pudding.
Yes. Yeah, I can't wait to try that. We had a little nibble of it when it came out. Terri was a little unsure, because that's the thing about these old recipes. They're a little light on some certain...
Light on instruction and weird on ingredients.
Yeah, but we tasted it, and hey, it tasted pretty dang good to me, so I can't wait to dig into it. Thank you, everybody, for taking this journey with us. I want to tell you that our sources for this episode were Dust Tracks on a Road by Zora Neale Hurston, published by J.B. Lippincott in 1942. The article Searching for Zora Neale Hurston by Alice Walker, published in Ms. Magazine in March of 1975. And Zora Neale Hurston and Florida Foods, there it is. Recipes, Remedies, and Simple Pleasures by Fred Opie, American Palate, 2015. If you would like to get in touch with me or leave some feedback about the show or just say hi, you can email at dinnerforher@gmail.com. You can leave me a voice message there if you would like me to play it on a future episode as an attachment. You can also visit my Facebook page, where there will be a post about the next episode, and you can leave feedback in the comment section or send me a message through Facebook Messenger. I can also be found on TikTok at dinnerforher. I would also greatly appreciate it if you would leave a review, a comment, a like, or share on your podcast listening app of choice. I want to give a big thank you to Mark at Pirate Core Entertainment for all of his hard work and giving me this platform. Please visit the Pirate Core website and their Facebook page, where you can find this podcast and many more, including my other project, What's On Tonight, with my dear friend Becky, which also has its own Facebook page. What's On Tonight is a spoiler-filled podcast about TV, movies, and more. Right now, we're wrapping up the first season of the HBO Max medical drama, The Pit. Check us out and join the conversation. Lastly, again, I want to give a big thanks to Terri. You were one of the people that gave me the courage to take on this dream, both with your encouraging words and the idea of just being able to sit down and do something like this, which we both love very much, and that's talking about badass women that we admire.
Hell yeah.
Thanks for listening. I want to let Zora have the last word here from her autobiography. There is no single face in nature, because every eye that looks upon it sees it from its own angle. So every man's spice box seasons his own food. Thanks, everyone, and please come back next time to see what incredible, powerful women will be joining us for dinner.
Bye.